Hey everybody, I thought we would try something fun today, and I've had a lot of people ask me about geometry and when we're going to start seeing some of that, and we're going to be doing a lot of it, but I don't want to jump in full force without making some things be seen that are a lot simpler to see for those of you who are not familiar with this kind of stuff. Geometry is extremely important when we're taking a look at this type of Kabbalism, because it really gets into understanding the way that the universe and yourself is created. There's a relationship between yourself, man, and the universe, which we might call God, okay? And if you understand the framework and how it works through geometry, then you have a much better understanding of what you're dealing with. This is a great way of, quote, going within, which a lot of people are using that terminology a lot, to describe just looking within yourself, but it's also misinterpreted in the sense that that doesn't mean just sitting by yourself and meditating quietly. It does not mean that. Going within yourself means understanding more about yourself. And when you understand more about yourself, then you understand more about the universe, because the metaphoric wording that was used in the Bible, for example, is that man was made in God's image. Now, if you understand what that means metaphorically, then you know that what it's referring to is that there is a similarity between the way things are in the universe geometrically and psychologically, and in many, many ways you'll find that there are many correspondences between man, meaning man and woman, and the universe. Okay, we're going to take a look at the Scarab beetle today. This is a really easy one to take a look at and see kind of what it means, but just to stress the importance of geometry in all this. This is from Hermetic.com, which I'll leave you a link to, and this is called The Anatomy of the Body of God. Now, this is not to be understood as the way a lot of mainstream orthodoxy churches would say. They always separate God as being some kind of separate being out somewhere judging people and casting lightning bolts from a cloud. Okay, that's not what we're referring to here when it says the anatomy of the body of God. It's referring to the anatomy of the universe and yourself, and there are things that we will see that are geometrically corresponding with each other. In the mysteries a long time ago, you were not even allowed into the mysteries or into the esoteric schools unless you understood geometry. As you can see right here, he's calling this Kabbalistic geometry. One of the things you'll note about the stuff that I will tend to reference is that I do not like to use things from a later date. I try to stick between 1900 and before, simply because I know that after 1900 you usually start getting things introduced like trash into the system, and what we call them things like blinders. And these are things to preoccupy or distract people so that they can't get to the truth. And as you've seen, if you go out on the internet, there's so much trash out there now that if you want to get to the truth about something, it's hard as an ignorant person who may not know anything about what you're looking for. If you fall victim to going out there and looking at the newest stuff that's not at least referencing the older stuff and showing how it's similar to what we see in the older texts and stuff like that, then you may be subject to some kind of a false teaching, somebody be trying to make money or something like that. This right here, The Supreme Revelation of Cosmic Consciousness by Frater Chad, Charles Stanfield Jones, and this is 1923. And this is okay because when I look through this, I can see that he's referencing the old stuff. I believe the 1920s, I think, is when Manly P. Hall came out with his Secret Teaching of All Ages. So 1920s, that's kind of pushing it just a little bit for me, but it's okay. But if you go, like, say, to 1970 and beyond, or especially the 1980s and beyond, you're really putting yourself in a position of falling victim to a bunch of trash that's out there. Unless you know, or unless you are a good researcher and understand that when you're reading something new, you can see that they're referencing something old. And that's why I always say start with the old stuff. Okay, so in masonry, for example, geometry is referred to as the first and noblest of the sciences, and is the head of all learning. One of the simplest figures produced by the intersection of two circles. Okay, so what I'm getting at here is the geometry that we see here is extremely important, and you could not even get into the mystery schools unless you understood it. A lot of the mystery schools that you see, and this is an ancient Egyptian relief here, they were centered around the geometry, which is the geometry of the anatomy of God, right? Which is the tree of life and its different forms. We can see the tree of life was used here. If you take a look at and this is one of the things that is done in alchemical drawings and in the ancient reliefs. They used symbolism and hieroglyphs in order to get people to think and contemplate regarding the tree of life and its various forms and what they were doing. Okay, so if you knew the geometry of the tree of life, you could use it as a code, and a lot of times Metatron's cube, like I've shown you, is a good way to do this, to decode what they were trying to show you. Now, it was just something more, what we'll see as we go into this more and more, the geometry, is something more than just placing a couple of things on a page and that's it. It's where the geometry is placed specifically. It's what is being symbolized by the particular geometry. Okay, let's take a look at this one, for example. And this has the Scarab beetle in it, which we're going to take a look at today. If you look at these two guys here, both their arms are angling up towards the sun at the top. Now, on the tree of life, this is called Kether. This is the top of the tree. Okay, and if you notice, the beetle is got a cross right on top of him. He's reaching up towards the sun. And this is the same kind of symbolism that you will see on the tree of life when you see a human, and his head is actually right here, where the beetle is. Right here, you see an eye on both sides. Okay, that they placed under here, and right under here you see this other disc. Now, here's another thing about the ancient geometry that you will see. It's all proportional. Okay, so if you can find a tree of life, if you get a good copy of the tree of life, there's templates that you can use out there, and you scale it to where one of the parts, for example, this circle right here, fits around the star just perfectly. And if you know what you're looking for, everything else on the relief will scale to proportion properly. Okay? So when they put things on here, they didn't just throw it on here as a symbol. They used the size of it and its location based on its proportion. So if I were to draw a large man, I wouldn't put a huge head on a small body, right? I'd put the same proportion head on the same proportion body depending on how large or how small it was. And that's exactly what they did with symbolism. But what people don't understand is they did it to such a degree and such an accuracy in some of their reliefs or what have you, that it really gives the person who wants to know more a lot of information. And that's what we're going to kind of take a look at in the Scarab beetle today. So what we have is, here's an image of a Scarab beetle, and you can see this has been carved into pink granite. This is it's very, very old. And one of the things you're going to notice on it is that you have the sun right here that the beetle is reaching up towards. And there are some interesting grooves on the top of the beetle. You see these grooves right here across its back. You have this one coming across right here. And then you have this one here going up and down. And then you have how it curves out on both sides. Okay. So, I'm not the first person to come up with the idea of what this was. So I'm going to kind of pull up this guy for you right here. And then I'm going to show you the detail behind it. You guys are probably familiar with R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. He studied the Temple of Luxor in Egypt for about 17 years. And I believe it was back in the 50s or 60s. And he learned a lot of stuff about it. He learned that these temples, a long time ago, and just like we'll see as we move more and more into Christian cathedrals and things like this, and he even goes into this as well, that the architecture behind these things, even all the way back into ancient Egypt, were designed after man, because man is made in the image of God. And so what we're talking about is the anatomy of the body of God, which is the same as what we call man, right? Because there's a geometrical similarity between the two. That's what it's getting after. So if we go on to page 51 here, and I highly recommend you guys read this, we see this. And so he's doing an analysis of the beetle, and he says it's interesting to find this organ contained in an external bony framework like the carapace of an insect. This characteristic, like the sutures of the skull, these right here, these lines I were just pointing out to you, okay? And the entire shape thus formed by the crown of the skull could be compared with the image of the scarab. Okay, so here we go right here. So he's making the comparison of the human skull to the scarab. Now, the human skull, this is seen from a superior view, and what that basically means, if you were above a person and you're looking down at him, that is what the skull would look like. Okay, if you remember the last series that we did, I believe it was the opening series, we took a look at the top three Sephiroth here, which is Kether or Keter, Chokmah, and Binah. This was the crown. This was the very top Sephiroth. This was wisdom, Chokmah, and this is Binah. And if you remember, this is wisdom and understanding, right? Okay, so now there are organs associated with these particular Sephiroths. Okay, and the top ones that you see right here, Keter refers to the skull. This refers to the right side of the brain, and this refers to the left side of the brain, and this refers to the central brain dot. Okay, so if we scroll down, we can take a look that see Keter's crown. Okay, and this is referenced from rabbis and stuff like that. You can check down at the bottom. So here we go, Keter, crown, skull, right? So Kether is associated with the skull. So if we remember from the Bible, it says, and they took him to a place called the place of the skull. You remember that? When they were talking about Jesus and his crucifixion? And that what they're referring to, Golgotha, which means place of the skull, are referring to Kether, the crown. This is what Qabalah is talking about. So one of the things you'll see on these particular images, and it doesn't stop with the Egyptian stuff, we'll also see the Assyrian tree of life and these other various forms of the tree of life. You'll see the same kind of thing. If you see that the beetle is at the very top here, right below what we have here. Now, you remember when it looked when we took a look at the chart for Kether, Chokmah, and Binah, right? And right here, the beetle is located just under Kether. He's reached the crown area, okay, because he's reached the crown of Doth right here, okay. So, and this is the way the human head fits inside here. So if you've done some research and you've taken a look, you'll see that the beetle is always exalted up to the very top here of these images. And so now we can kind of put the pieces together when we take a look at work like from R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, and I'll show you a similarity. So we come back over here, and here's our image of the scarab beetle. Okay. Now let's take a look at the image of the skull right along with it. Here's an image of the human skull here on the right as opposed to the scarab beetle. And if we zoom in, oops, it's a little bit too far. You'll note that I've labeled the sutures. So this is the coronal suture that you see right here moving across the top here. This vertical one here is called the sagittal suture. And then down here, the lambdoid suture that you can see right here that's